Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that the United Kingdom, a nation historically synonymous with stability and prosperity, has roughly 700 days before the fundamental way its citizens live, work, and retire changes forever? And what if I told you that while the world is distracted by daily headlines, 6 separate existential crises are converging simultaneously to dismantle the British economy, creating a perfect storm that 95% of the population is completely unprepared for? We are not discussing a temporary recession or a standard market correction. We are looking at a fundamental shift in the trajectory of a G7 nation. The evidence suggests that the United Kingdom is facing a systemic collapse driven by deep-seated internal structural decay colliding with an impending global financial shock. To understand the gravity of this situation, we must look beyond the comforting assurances of politicians and examine the cold, hard data provided by credit agencies, the Bank of England, and economic demographics. The picture that emerges is not one of hope, but of a nation sleepwalking into a disaster that has already begun. To understand where this collapse begins, we must first look at the immediate trigger, the AI bubble and the looming debt crisis. While the structural rot within the UK has been festering for decades, the catalyst that may bring the entire edifice crashing down is likely to come from the global financial markets. The Bank of England BOE, an institution known for its conservative, understated language, has recently issued a financial stability report that serves as a screaming siren for those who know how to interpret it. The BOE has explicitly stated that the risk environment surrounding the UK economy has deteriorated. They highlight a toxic cocktail of global economic uncertainty, escalating geopolitical tensions, and stressed sovereign debt markets. However, the most immediate and terrifying threat identified by the central bank is the formation of a massive asset bubble surrounding artificial intelligence (AI). This crisis starts with what we might call the valuation trap. Current stock market valuations for AI companies are mirroring the most dangerous financial bubbles in history. In the United States, valuations are approaching levels not seen since the bursting of the dot-com bubble in 2000. In the UK and Europe, share prices are hovering at highs reminiscent of 2008, just before the global financial crisis wiped out trillions in wealth. The pattern is unmistakable: extreme optimism driving asset prices to levels that are mathematically detached from reality. The core of this danger lies in the specific mechanics of the AI boom. The world's largest technology companies are preparing to inject approximately $5 trillion into AI infrastructure chips, data centers, and power grids over the next 5 years. This is one of the largest capital expenditures in human history. If this were funded purely by profits, it would be a risky bet. But it is not. According to the Bank of England, roughly half of this investment, round to $0.5 trillion, is being financed through debt. Beyond valuations, we are witnessing a profitability gap that creates profound systemic fragility. We are witnessing a financial model that is fundamentally unsustainable. Take the example of major AI firms like OpenAI. Industry data suggests infrastructure commitments reaching $1.4 trillion over the coming years, dwarfing current annual revenues of roughly $13 billion. This chasm between revenue and expenditure cannot be bridged by organic growth. It requires a perpetual drip of external financing. This creates a systemic fragility. If the promised AI revolution is delayed, or if the monetization of these technologies does not match the exponential growth of the debt used to build them, the entire house of cards faces collapse. We are looking at a potential Minsky moment, a sudden collapse of asset values which is part of the credit cycle or business cycle. The Bank of England warns that this debt is not isolated. It has permeated the banking sector and, more worryingly, the shadow banking sector. Hedge funds and private equity firms have taken on massive leverage to ride the airwave. In the UK alone, hedge funds have accumulated roughly £100 billion in leveraged borrowing linked to UK gilts government bonds. This sector is opaque, lightly regulated, and unlike traditional banks, it has never been stress-tested by a macroeconomic downturn of this magnitude. If the AI bubble bursts, the losses will not be contained to Silicon Valley. They will ripple through the interconnected web of global finance, triggering a credit freeze that the UK, with its weakened economy, is ill-equipped to survive. If the financial markets are the spark, we must next examine the fuel, the deep structural economic decay and internal rot within the UK economy. If the AI debt bubble is the match, the UK's domestic economy is the pile of dry tinder waiting to ignite. The immediate trigger of a financial crash would be manageable for a robust nation. But Britain is no longer a robust nation. Let's look specifically at the recent credit downgrade and the ongoing productivity crisis. Last week, a significant event occurred that barely made the mainstream news cycle. Moody has downgraded Britain's credit rating from AA to AA. To the average citizen, this may sound like abstract financial jargon, but the implications are tangible and severe. The international financial community has effectively looked at the UK government's books and declared a loss of confidence. This is the national equivalent of a credit score drop. It means every pound the government borrows to fund hospitals, schools, or infrastructure now costs more. This loss of confidence is rooted in a productivity crisis that has flatlined the economy. UK productivity, the value created per hour worked, is now 20% lower than that of France and Germany. In practical terms, what takes a German worker 4 days to produce takes a British worker 5. This inefficiency acts as a permanent brake on economic growth. Without growth, the tax receipts needed to fund the National Health Service, NHS, pensions, and welfare simply do not exist. Furthermore, business investment in the UK is dead last among the G7 nations. Global corporations are voting with their wallets. When deciding where to build new factories or tech hubs, they are choosing Poland, Germany, or the United States. They are bypassing Birmingham for Berlin. This leads us inevitably to the harsh reality of wage regression. The human cost of this stagnation is devastating. The average British worker today earns less in real terms than they did in 2008. Let that sink in. We are looking at a 17-year period and entire generation of working life where the population has gotten poorer. This has never happened before in modern British history, not through world wars and not through the Great Depression. The social contract, the promise that hard work leads to a better life, has been broken. Compounding these economic failures, the nation is racing toward a demographic and social cliff. Compounding the economic stagnation is a demographic trap from which there is no easy escape. The math is brutally simple and impossible to ignore. At the heart of this social crisis lies a demographic trap. To maintain a stable population, a country needs a replacement birth rate of 2.1 children per woman. The UK's birth rate has crashed to 1.49. We are not replacing ourselves. While a shrinking population might sound like it would relieve pressure on resources, the reality is a nightmare scenario. The population isn't just shrinking, it is aging rapidly. We are moving toward a dependency ratio that is mathematically unsustainable. Currently, there are about 3 working-age people for every pensioner. By 2050, we are approaching a ratio of 1. Imagine an economy where one worker's taxes must support their own family plus the pension and health care costs of one retiree. It is a financial impossibility. The system will break. Japan has been fighting this battle for 3 decades, resulting in economic stagnation. South Korea is facing extinction with a birth rate of 0.7. The UK is on the same path, just 15 years behind. The standard political answer immigration is no longer a viable silver bullet. To keep the age ratio stable, the UK would need to import nearly 1 million young people every single year, forever. Given the current political climate and social tensions, this is not politically realistic. This demographic pressure is accelerating a dangerous social fragmentation. This economic and demographic pressure is ripping the social fabric apart. We are seeing a return to Victorian-level inequality. A child born in the deprived town of Blackpool now has a life expectancy 10 years shorter than a child born in the wealthy borough of Westminster. This is not the statistic of a developed nation. It is the sign of a failing state. Consequently, trust in institutions, Parliament, the police, the media, the NHS is plummeting. We are witnessing the emergence of a two-tier society. In wealthy areas, private security guards patrol the streets, while in the rest of the country, crime is accepted as a normal part of life because the police no longer have the resources to investigate. The shared sense of solidarity that carried Britain through World War II is gone, replaced by tribalism. Young versus old, cities versus towns, leavers versus remainers. These groups no longer share a reality, making political consensus on painful but necessary reforms impossible, while society fractures. We must also confront the reality of total infrastructure and energy system failure, while the society fractures. The physical world around us is literally crumbling. The UK has entered an infrastructure doom loop. This occurs when infrastructure decays past a critical point where it becomes too expensive to fix, so it is left to degrade further, which only makes the eventual repair costs even more astronomical. The most visible evidence of this is the physical decay of the nation's core systems. The water system is a prime example of this catastrophe. Victorian-era pipes are collapsing underground, leaking 30% of all water before it ever reaches a tap. Water companies, having paid out billions in dividends rather than investing in repairs, are now warning of water shortages in major cities within a decade, not because of drought, but because the pipes cannot deliver the water. The road network faces a £14 billion backlog for emergency repairs. Local councils, bankrupt and starved of cash, cannot fill the potholes. In 10 years, large sections of the road network will be essentially unusable. The NHS faces an £11 billion maintenance backlog, with hospitals operating in buildings where roofs leak and ceilings are at risk of collapse. Operating theatres are being closed because the buildings themselves are unsafe. Perhaps even more dangerous than crumbling roads is the nation's extreme energy vulnerability. Perhaps the most dangerous vulnerability lies in energy. The UK has allowed North Sea oil and gas production to fall by 75% since 2000, transforming the nation from an energy exporter to a massive net importer. This exposure was laid bare in 2022 when energy bills tripled, forcing the government to spend tens of billions it didn't have to subsidize bills and prevent immediate collapse. We have shut down coal plants and allowed nuclear facilities to age out, betting everything on renewables and gas imports. Yet, the renewable transition is built on a foundation of sand. The UK produces almost none of the copper, lithium, or rare earth minerals required for wind turbines and batteries. We are entirely dependent on global supply chains, predominantly controlled by China. If those supply chains are disrupted, the UK's energy transition stops dead, leaving the country facing genuine blackouts. These domestic failures are occurring against a backdrop of geopolitical isolation and the risk of global contagion. For decades, Britain relied on its international standing to paper over domestic cracks. That era is over. The UK's international position has weakened dramatically over the last 10 years. We have to be honest about the post-Brexit reality. Leaving the European Union meant leaving the UK's largest trading partner. The frictionless market access that British businesses relied on is gone, replaced by paperwork, delays, and increased costs. European investment has plummeted. Furthermore, the special relationship with the United States is in decline. Britain's strategic value to Washington was largely as a bridge to Europe. Without that influence, the US is pivoting its attention to the Pacific and Asia. The UK is scrambling to sign trade deals with nations like India and Australia, but it is doing so from a position of weakness. As a medium-sized economy desperate for deals, the UK is forced to make concessions that offer little benefit to its domestic industries. This diplomatic isolation is mirrored by a stark military weakness. Hard power backs soft power, and here too, the decline is stuck. The British Army is at its smallest size since the Napoleonic Wars. The Royal Navy cannot maintain its ships, and the RAF is flying aging aircraft. While the UK remains a nuclear power, in conventional terms, it is a shadow of its former self. In a world of rising geopolitical conflict, being militarily weak and diplomatically isolated is a dangerous combination. Crucially, this isolation leaves the UK highly exposed to global contagion. Crucially, the Bank of England warns that even if the UK had its own house in order, it is highly exposed to global contagion. The US stock market is currently being propped up by a handful of AI companies: Nvidia, Microsoft, Google, which accounted for 67% of the S&P 500's returns recently. If the US market sneezes, the world catches a cold. Because the City of London is so deeply integrated into global finance, a crash in US AI stocks would immediately drag down UK equities, pension funds, and the value of the pound. The UK is exposed to the risks of the American system without having the resilience of the American economy. When we step back to look at the macro picture, we face a scenario that is potentially something worse than a recession. When we step back and look at the macro picture, the warnings align with the theories of renowned investor Ray Dalio. Dalio argues that we are not merely facing a business cycle recession, but something worse. He identifies 5 historic forces converging simultaneously: excessive debt, internal political division, geopolitical conflict, natural disasters, climate risk, and rapid technological disruption, AI. The UK is the epicenter where all these forces are colliding. We are facing a breakdown of the monetary order. The concern is that governments, including the UK, have borrowed to the limit. When the next crisis hits, be it a war, a pandemic, or a financial crash, the fiscal capacity to bail out the system simply won't exist. This leads to a currency crisis, where confidence in the pound evaporates, causing hyperinflation in import costs, food and energy, while the domestic economy collapses. This is the doom loop in its final form. Economic stagnation leads to lower tax revenue. Lower revenue means infrastructure cannot be fixed. Crumbling infrastructure kills growth. Lack of growth leads to more debt, and eventually the creditors stop lending. I want to pause here and ask for your perspective on this. Do you believe the UK can still navigate these 6 converging crises through policy reform? Or are we inevitably heading toward the systemic collapse described by the Bank of England? It is a complex issue with no easy answers, so I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. So, how does this play out in the coming years, and what is the timeline of decline and strategic adaptation? So, how does this play out? We are not looking at a Hollywood-style overnight apocalypse, but a grinding, accelerating degradation of quality of life. Here is the projected timeline. By 2026, we will see an acceleration of council bankruptcies. Cities like Birmingham were just the first dominoes. Libraries, youth centers, and non-essential services will vanish. NHS waiting lists will hit new records, and real wages will continue to fall. Moving into 2027, the first major infrastructure failures will occur. This could be a regional power blackout, a water crisis in a major city, or a critical transport failure. The government will promise fixes it cannot afford. By 2028 and 2029, the economic crisis hits in full force. Whether triggered by a US recession or a homegrown debt crisis, unemployment will spike, and the cost of national debt will become unsustainable. Real austerity will begin, not just cuts to growth, but deep slashes to core services. From 2030 to 2032, we reach the social breaking point. We can expect mass protests, strikes, and potentially civil unrest. Political instability will become the norm, with governments unable to last full terms. Finally, from 2033 onwards, the UK faces a fork in the road. One path is radical, painful restructuring. The more likely path is managed decline, the UK accepting its new status as a medium-income country with deteriorating services, relying on mass immigration to keep the lights on. Now, we must confront the psychology of denial and the mechanics of survival in this new reality. To truly prepare, we must first confront the psychological barrier that prevents action: normalcy bias. This is the cognitive glitch that leads people to believe that because things have always been a certain way, they will continue to be that way forever. It is the reason why people stay in burning buildings or wait too long to evacuate before a hurricane. In the case of the UK, it manifests as the belief that Britain is a rich country. It will bounce back. It always has. But history is littered with the wreckage of empires and nations that thought exactly the same thing right up until the moment they fell. We must understand that decline is not an anomaly. It is a historical constant. The anomaly was the stability of the last 70 years. By assuming that the state will always be solvent and the lights will always stay on, you are betting your future on an anomaly that is ending. We must also be clear about what life looks like in a state of managed decline. It does not necessarily look like a Hollywood apocalypse with fire in the streets. Instead, it looks like a slow, suffocating squeeze on the middle class. It looks like paying European-level taxes for American-level services. It means that the public safety net, the police, the ambulance service, the state pension becomes a lottery rather than a guarantee. In this environment, the state essentially breaches its contract with the citizen. You continue to pay into the system, but the system ceases to pay out. This forces a de facto privatization of your life. If you want safety, you pay for an alarm system or private security. If you want health, you pay for a private insurance. If you want a retirement, you fund it entirely yourself. The crisis is not just that services disappear. It is that you will be forced to pay for them twice, once in taxes, and again out of pocket. Therefore, your preparation strategy must be aggressive and multifaceted. It begins with financial sovereignty. Holding the majority of your net worth in British pounds or UK-centric assets is a dangerous gamble. If the UK experiences a sovereign debt crisis or a currency collapse similar to the 1976 IMF, bail out, but worse, the purchasing power of your savings could be wiped out overnight. You need exposure to assets that are inversely correlated to the UK's economic health. This means global equities, commodities, and perhaps currencies of nations with stronger fiscal balance sheets. You cannot afford home bias in your portfolio when your home is on fire. Beyond finance, you must cultivate professional anti-fragility in a shrinking economy. The job market becomes a zero-sum game. The most secure position is one where your income is detached from the local economy. If you can work remotely for a company based in the US, Switzerland, or Singapore, you are essentially engaging in geographic arbitrage earning in a strong currency while living in a weakening one. This protects you from the local wage stagnation we discussed earlier. If your income is entirely dependent on UK consumer spending or government contracts, you are directly in the blast radius of the coming collapse. Finally, we must talk about the window of opportunity. I mentioned at the start that we have roughly 700 days. This is an estimate based on the convergence of these debt cycles and political timelines. Right now, capital controls do not exist. Right now, you can move money freely. Right now, you can apply for visas elsewhere. Right now, you can buy gold or foreign assets with a click of a button. When the crisis becomes acute, these doors slam shut. Governments in crisis always try to trap capital and people to keep the system afloat. The time to build your lifeboat is not when the ship is sinking. It is while the band is still playing. Do not mistake the current calm for safety. It is merely the deep breath before the plunge. If you are finding value in this analysis and want to stay ahead of these economic shifts, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to uncover these critical trends that impact us all. This brings us to the final and most important question. What are you going to do about it, friends? The UK we have known for the last 75 years prosperous, stable. Providing comprehensive public services is ending. This is not pessimism. It is realism based on official data. The collapse is already underway. It is just happening slowly enough that most people haven't realized it yet. The state will not be coming to save you. The math dictates that pensions, healthcare, and social care cannot exist in their current form 10 years from now. Therefore, the responsibility falls on you. You must build geographical optionality. If you have skills that are transferable, look at countries like Australia or Canada that are actively recruiting. You must invest in portable assets. Do not keep all your wealth locked in a liquid UK property or sterling. You must build personal resilience, backup power. Water storage and strong community networks are not paranoia. They are sensible insurance against failing infrastructure. The question is not, is Britain about to collapse? The question is, what are you going to do about it? The gap between those who see this coming and prepare, and those who assume normalcy will continue, will be the difference between security and devastation. Make your decisions now, while there is still time.